This is going to be part 3 of how to diagnose a fueling issue on your N54 powered BMW. Today we're going to be working on the low pressure fuel pump. So I bought the following kit online. That's the part number there. It was actually $94 after a promo code. Bought it at JC Whitney. It's the complete assembly with the bucket and the leveler and everything you're going to need. A new seal for the top of the tank. So I'm not about throwing parts at a car, but at the same time this has 180,000 miles on it. So far as I can tell, it's the original fuel pump. Maybe it was changed once in its life, but even still, there's a lot of miles on that pump, and I want to change it proactively just for maintenance before it becomes an issue. I changed the low pressure fuel sensor in part 2 of this video and discovered that that was defective, which would inaccurately report to the ECU the health of the actual fuel pump. So changing the sensor lets you know the true condition of the pump. As far as I could tell, it was holding up okay. It drops down to about 50 or 49 psi at peak demand, and I'm not sure that's great, or if replacing it's going to improve on that. We'll see. I'll data log to let you guys know if maybe you should be replacing these for maintenance, because even though it doesn't leave you on the side of the road and the car won't start, maybe it can't keep up with demand because it doesn't run at like 40 psi. It runs at a target of 72 psi. I've already done my fuel pressure regulator. You'll find a video on my channel discussing that, but today we're going to change out this fuel pump and see if it makes a difference. I'm specifically targeting a hesitation issue that I'm getting at around 2,000 to 4,000 RPM at 50% throttle. Even at full throttle, it doesn't really start to pick up hard until I get above 4,000 RPM. And I've heard that it's plausible that the actual fuel pump going out could affect the pressure that the high pressure fuel pump can build, and it's most dependent on the low pressure fuel pump in that RPM range. So step 1 is going to be to get into the back of the car. You got to pull up the actual rear seat here to get access to the fuel pump. And to do so, you just lift up on it. We'll be working right here. That's the actual low pressure fuel pump. So I do actually show you how to get most of the lines off on my fuel pressure regulator video, because you have to actually disconnect lines that go over to the driver's side to actually remove the fuel pump. But in this case, I'm just going to show you guys again and also show you completely replacing the actual fuel pump. So we got to remove these 4 10 mil bolts here, nuts rather. We can lift up on this. And to relieve fuel pressure, what I want to do here is remove these connectors. So I want to unplug these connectors. That way we can start the car to relieve all the fuel pressure. So I have those lines disconnected, and we'll start it up. It should just stall right out. There we go. 2 quick pulses is enough to relieve all the fuel pressure on those lines. Next up, we're going to remove these lines on top. You just got to push in and pull up. On that one, there's a little spot to press up at the front of the line. And if I recall correctly on this one, you got to kind of rotate this over to be able to lift up on it. There's 2 gray tabs on the side. Yeah. So unless you turn the line like that, you won't be able to get that out. I borrowed this fuel pump replacement kit from my local auto parts store. That's the part number for it. It was at an AutoZone. And it has one part that we're going to want to use. And that is right here. So the way this tool works is you adjust the actual arms to match the notches on the ring of your car. It's a 12 mil wrench to lock that down. And because these things are pretty tight, I'd recommend that you use a 1/2" drive to a 3/8 adapter and a 1/2" socket. And we can try rotating it. You know, if you don't borrow this tool, it is possible to get a hammer and try to go all around that, but it can make the job a bit of a nightmare, so I'd recommend you get the tool. So you just unscrew this. And it's under spring tension. It's going to want to pop up at you. Now, I want to be able to put that into something. So let's go ahead and try to lift this out. The first thing that's going to be move that line out of my way. So you want to lift up on this, and first step is to remove this line over from the fuel pressure regulator. You're going to push in here and then you can slide it off. Like so. And you can lift up on this. There's 2 connectors there that would be useful to remove. So you want to get a screwdriver in here and depress the actual connector. So those are the 2 lines. There's a tether here. So I just pop that tether out so I can get this piece right out of the car. I'm going to change this O-ring. There's a new one, comes with a new O-ring, so I'll remove that. Just be careful you don't get dirt inside your tank, ideally. Now we're looking at the top of the actual fuel pump assembly. There's a line that snaps in right here. It's just a vent line. There's 2 actually. So we're going to have to unclick those. So to get this fuel line off, you're going to want to rotate it. Normally it sits right like that. You want to lift up on this, bring it over this way, so you'll have enough room to put your thumb on the end of the connector there. There's a green push pin. That way you can use your thumb and then you'll be able to just lift it off. It could be on there quite tight, so be careful when you're doing that. It may actually come off with the line. That could break if you're not careful. So normally you don't have enough room to stick your thumb in on the side here, but when you rotate the line you'll have enough room and then you can kind of finagle it and lift it straight up. So that's off now. You have these 2 lines here from the fuel pressure regulator for return or whatnot. So those 2 are unclipped now, and that's everything that needs to be removed to be able to remove the actual pump. So I'll show you guys that now. So you don't have much room. You got to make sure all the harnesses and everything are up above the pump first. And the actual float, you want to make sure that that's not going to get stuck up on anything. Let's remove this from the car. We have a funnel there to drain what's left of the fuel inside the bucket into there. I had some debris at the bottom of the tank, just a few specks that I actually use a cloth to scoop up. Got rid of those so it's all fresh. And here's the assembly removed from the car. So there's the actual low pressure pump. I drained out all the fuel. You can see the stock one. And here's our new O-ring. Let's compare the parts. So these are the lines on top. We'll go in like this. Everything looks the same. So we'll go ahead and install this. I'm going to take apart the top of this as well, just so it'll be easier to drop the lower part in. So I have the top disassembled from the base. Let's go ahead and install that in the car now. So I have those 3 lines connected. Let's put that new seal in place. I'm going to bring the top portion over. So I did the fuel line. I clipped on the 2 lines from the fuel pressure regulator connected to 2 harnesses, the tether, and that vent line. So we're ready to replace this. So we're back down into position. There's a notch over here over here that has to be lined up. Now before we put this ring into place, it's important to make sure these lines are not tucked out of the way, because you may not be able to get to them after. It's good and tight. We're good to go. Now before putting that back seat back down, let's try to start the car. I got a bit of a prime from there. That was pretty uneventful. It primed up really quickly actually. It was pretty good. So running good. We will put the back seat back together, and I'm going to data log to see if it made any difference. So I took it for a drive, and the issue is still there. I wasn't really expecting it to resolve the issue actually after some of the research I've done, but I looked into other things to check into with regards to resetting adaptations. Now, I did one thing to my car actually. I put a little spacer on the throttle pedal to have it so that it wouldn't downshift into first gear if you started off in second gear, but that didn't work anyway actually. I think because I have an Alpina transmission tune, regardless it kicks you down after a certain percentage of throttle input. But I did that, and I figured that could have thrown things off over time, maybe because it was never really getting to 100% throttle. It was at like 99 point something, because based on the spacer I put on my throttle pedal. I don't know if that interfered, but I was just looking at my data logs. This is before. This is prior to changing my fuel pump. I'm going to do another data log to monitor fuel pressure, but low pressure PSI, here's before, and it dips down. Our lowest point is 50 PSI. So we're going to double check that, redo our data log with this new pump, just to see if this changed at all. Just to get an idea if over time your fuel pump degrades and you lose fuel pressure. But anyway, here's my accelerator position. It's 99.6. I was trying to make it so that it wouldn't go to full throttle, full kickdown mode. But what I did do was look at throttle position, and this is what's happening. It's dipping down hard and then it comes back. That's the actual throttle valve, and that could be an adaptation flaw or some kind of glitch, and it could be related to this. I'm not sure. What I'm going to try to do now is reset the throttle adaptation using MHD flasher and also the Lambda O2 sensor adaptations. Since I've changed my fuel pump now, wouldn't be a bad idea anyway, and we'll see if that makes any type of difference. And then regardless, we're doing another data log just to monitor fuel pressure. I will go out and do that now to see, does our fuel pressure line here improve at all? Is it going to stay more flat, or regardless, are we going to dip down? Is that normal or not? I have my cable connected to the car. I have my tablet out here. I'm going to launch MHD flasher, and we're going to go into codes, and the goal will be to reset adaptations. Now it says, after a throttle reset, turn off ignition, then turn on ignition and wait 30 seconds before starting the engine. So I'm going to do that now. So we're going to click throttle. Throttle is reset. Now we're going to turn off the ignition. Make sure your screen goes right off. We're going to turn the car on. Don't press the brake. We'll count. That was definitely more than 30 seconds, so I'm going to turn the ignition off now. I think it's safe to start the car if you want to at that point, but if you want to be double sure, turn the car off. And when I start the car now, it should just seem normal. If you didn't do things right, you'll get a really rough idle, or it'll be bouncing all around the place. Or you may get a symbol on your dash. So that's good, everything seems normal. That took care of the throttle adaptation. I'll shut the car off. I'll go back to the key on position. And we're going to reset the lambda sensors now. And there it says lambda sensors was reset. So I'll go key off. We should be safe to start the car now. So everything seems good. We're ready to go for a data log. So I'm back from the run. Just did a couple pulls, second gear, and we have our values now. So here's accelerator position. The throttle remapping or the throttle adaptation reset didn't really solve my issues. I had I'm not sure what the deal is with that actually. You know, like I said, that hesitation issue is still there. This log is with the hesitation issue kicking in and then clearing up at around 4,000 RPM, just like it was previously when we checked the fuel pressure on the rail. So what I'm not sure about is why it dips down there, but I looked at one of my really old logs from back when I was using a virtual dyno to see how much power my car was making after doing an intercooler, and it was doing it even back then for some reason. Even my fuel pressure was down in the low 50s, and it was dipping down quite a bit back then. So those two issues were there a long time ago when the car felt normal. So I'm not going to spend too much energy on that issue. But here's accelerator position. We have our boost going up, and we have our fuel pressure. So it targets, you know, it sticks around 73. Let's see if you can make that out. 73, and stays stable. I'm on at 100% throttle here at 6100 RPM. It's 79, 67, etc. Lowest. This is where I was about to let off, I believe. But either way, at the lowest point, I've gained almost 14 psi. On average, I'm maintaining 66, 67 psi at the low pressure sensor. So my stock fuel pump was working, but I heard the absolute bare bones lowest number you want it to be at is, depends on how much power your car is making, etc., but you don't want it to go below 50 psi. On one of my data logs, I was at 49 with my stock fuel pump, my original fuel pump. This is another stock replacement, but brand new. So I'm still working on my hesitation issue, but in terms of what this series was about, how to diagnose a fueling issue on your car, you know, the fueling issue isn't the underlying problem, but what seems to be common is your low pressure sensor fails, and the car can't even report to you if the low pressure fuel pump is failing, and you could be driving on one that is not giving adequate pressure to the system, which then causes the high pressure fuel pump to work a little harder to build that 50 psi up to what it needs to be instead of working with this higher pressure. It makes a big difference. So was it worth me buying that low pressure sensor? I threw a part at the car for the sake of diagnosing an issue, but it was worth it here because at least I have a functional low pressure sensor now. And using the data from that brand new sensor indicated that my stock low pressure fuel pump was weak. So I ordered one up proactively for maintenance, and I put it in, and we've picked up more than 10 psi at redline, more like 15, 16 psi. It's almost flat. So here's where we are today, and here's where we were before with the stock fuel pump. Fuel pressure was at 73 psi, and then once you get on it at higher RPMs, it dips all the way down to 50 psi. And then when you let off it, it's able to recover. It's able to supply enough fuel because you don't have the demand. And now, let's take an RPM point. Let's take this lowest point here, 62, 67 RPM. We were at 50 psi. 62, 67 RPM. Or we'll get as close as we can. We're at 66 psi. So definitely improve things. Now what we can look at here as well is we can look at the rail pressure. It's going to throw the whole graph off, but let's see. So rail pressure at 4,000 RPM, 2843. This is a high pressure fuel pump doing the work now. And then at the low point, 6267, rail pressure was 1860. I think that's pretty good actually. That seems like a healthy high pressure pump. Now what we'll do here is look at the rail pressure after. So it's going to push the whole graph off. At 4,000 RPM, we're at 2617. 4,000 RPM here, 2843. You know, this is, I think we just got to look at the actual numbers here. So basically starts off in the 25, let's say 28 to 22 to 24. It fluctuates a bit there. I'm not sure what that is all about, as you can see. But then it kind of, let's just start with 24. Let's look at 4,600 RPM as our point. It drops from 24, or about 2,500 psi, down to the lowest is 1860. Now 4,600 RPM, and these are both wide open throttle, FYI. So as close as we can get there. 24, pretty much the same story, but when there's a high demand on it, it drops to a very similar amount, 18. So we're at 6,200 RPM, so 1,900 psi. So either way, this graph isn't, for the high pressure side, isn't that bad. Meaning the actual low pressure pump wasn't giving as much psi. For instance here, 50 and 1860 at 6,300 RPM, 6,300 RPM here, 66 psi and 1903, so it's a little higher, but either way the high pressure pump compensates for a weak low pressure pump. But what's a little alarming is when you have your low pressure sensor fail in an arbitrary number, at an arbitrary number like what mine was at, 55.7. And it seems to have been like that since the first time I ever data logged this car, like 8 months ago. It was always there, and I just never knew. And because I had no symptoms, I wasn't chasing, trying to get the issue resolved because it wasn't throwing any hard check engine lights. So you can have a low pressure fuel pump failing. The sensor fails in such a way that the car is not able to tell that you may be dropping into the 40s and 30s high RPM, starving the high pressure pump, causing the high pressure pump to fail prematurely. So I needed to do these two things thus far. So far I've replaced parts that on face value weren't really causing a problem yet, but things weren't right. The low pressure sensor wasn't reporting properly. My low pressure fuel pump wasn't maintaining ideal PSI. My vacuum lines going to my diverter valves were about to fall apart. My O-rings on my diverter valves were had some grit in it and they weren't in great condition. My fuel injector seals were not OEM and they needed to be replaced. So I'm basically just going through the car and doing stuff that hasn't really cost me a lot of money, really. I've only spent 150 something, 160 bucks thus far. Maybe around 170 with the seal, the O-rings, and all things considered. So it's not like it's a big deal, and I'm waiting for the parts to come, and I'm buying the most economical parts I can find. So, you know, it's not a pressing issue. It's just I'm leaving all this in. You know, it's a long video. Sorry for all the details, but I'm leaving all of this in to help you guys. If you've been having issues, maybe one of these will be your issue. But in terms of this series, fueling issues on the low pressure side, that's going to conclude this series. I'll follow up with another video when I resolve the issue with the hesitation. The next thing I'm going to look at is my coils. I put some cheap Chinese coils on there, and I still have my original coils that I could at least toss in to see if they make a difference. So that's going to conclude this video. Your low pressure fuel pump will degrade over time. It's quite evident here. So depending on your mileage, consider replacing it for maintenance. It's not like it works perfectly till the last day where it just stops working. It degrades and you lose fuel pressure, putting a bigger strain on your actual high pressure pump. So thanks for watching and good luck.